I'll be honest. I don't have too much of an idea about how the final scene in my marriage played out. At the time when Candace got home from her conference, I was 30,000 feet in the air. I would like to imagine that she walked in the door yelling out a greeting she was home, followed by how much she missed me, and lastly, she was glad to be home. I bet she was hoping that I would be waiting with dinner on the table like I usually did. I want to think that she frowned when she walked into the kitchen and found the full-color printout of her less than 48 hours earlier, spending time with my boss, her boss, one of my close friends, and to throw a curveball into the mix, my lawyer. As she looked underneath the printout, I'm sure she became upset at the divorce papers staring back at her, the copy of the prenuptial agreement, and a 30-day eviction notice. I would like to think that she was upset and inconsolable, but honestly, I have no idea. But then again, a little over a month ago, I had no idea my wife was being unfaithful, and my employer, her employer, and even my friends were enjoying the company of my wife that were supposed to be mine and mine alone as mentioned in our wedding vows. My name is Thomas Other, 27 years old, and I was the sole heir to a $70 million trust left by my grandparents when I turned 32 that was the motivation behind all the trouble I was in. Until then, I became an adult. I received a monthly payment which was part of the interest the fund generated each month. I also received rental incomes from several investment properties around the country and my own luxurious penthouse apartment with zero debt. But I wasn't a lazy trust fund baby. By day, I worked as an accountant for Sayman & Zaks, a high-end accounting firm based in Melbourne, Australia. By now, you're guessing that I had grown up in a well-off family, and you would certainly be correct. However, my parents had always taught me never to look down on someone who didn't have the same background as us. I was an only child and had lost both my parents and grandparents at the same time. They were aboard a private plane that went down over Europe while they were on holiday when I was 21. I was supposed to be on that trip, but I had university exams, so I became the sole surviving heir to the family fortune. It wasn't a secret that I was inheriting a huge trust, but I never flaunted it. My parents had bought me a beautiful penthouse apartment near the university, which also ended up being a close walk to Sayman & Zaks when I graduated, so I had been living comfortably for a number of years. Now, back to my unfaithful wife. I met Candace one evening when a couple of friends and I were out on the town. Candace was with a few girlfriends doing the same thing. We danced, I bought a few rounds of drinks, and she ended up back at my apartment in bed with me when we realized, following the drunken haze, that we liked each other. Ironically, Candace was out that night supporting one of her girlfriends who had found out her boyfriend was being unfaithful. Over the next few months, Candace and I met up several times, each time ending with us having a great time in bed. It was no surprise when we decided to become exclusive. I truly believe that in those early days, the fact that I had money never really bothered Candace. Until recently, I always thought that she was level-headed. Candace worked at a top-tier marketing firm in the city, making a decent wage herself. Looking back, I thought we had a great married life. As a young couple with means, we rarely ate at home. Tuesdays and Thursdays were gym evenings for both of us, and Saturday nights were reserved for going out on the town, enjoying fine dining, dancing at clubs, or laughing ourselves silly at one of the local comedy clubs. I cringed when I thought back to asking her to marry me. Of course, she said yes, and at the time, I thought I was the luckiest man alive. In the looks department, Candace was what most teenagers would think is fairly average. She had mousy brown hair and was perhaps a little heavier than she wanted to be. But she had a great personality, and she loved spending quality time with me. We made memories together, whether it was going on adventures, enjoying shared hobbies, or simply cuddling on the couch and watching movies. Our intimacy in the bedroom was something special to us, but it's important to note that we respected each other's boundaries and focused on emotional connection. We didn't engage in any explicit activities. After a long day, we always found comfort in each other's arms. We had been married for 2 years and were starting to talk about a family when, in retrospect, it all started falling apart. Every few months, Candace would have to travel for work, a conference, or some other reason. At first, I never gave it any thought. I mean, we never have cause to doubt the ones we love, do we? In our private moments, nothing changed overly much. We still found solace in each other's embrace, and sure, I missed her when she was gone. But I always knew when she came home, we would reconnect on a deeper level. More than once, when my wife was traveling, I looked through our photo albums, reminiscing about the beautiful memories we had created. But I never thought of the difficult situation coming my way until one day it did. My manager and partner in the firm I worked for, George Saman, had just announced that he had to travel for 3 weeks. It happened now and then, but the duration of 3 weeks caught my attention. Candace this morning also mentioned that she had a 3-week conference to attend next week as well. Of course, being unaware, I thought it was just idle trivia. But it was one of our interns, a 22-year-old intern, Iona from Germany, that brought something to my attention. "Hey Thomas," Iona said, entering my office after George's announcement. "You got a minute?" "Sure, Iona. Give me a second," I told her, just finishing up some work on my computer. I turned back to her and studied her for a moment. Iona Braun was quite short but had a charming presence. She had long golden hair, big expressive blue eyes, and a petite stature. She always dressed professionally, displaying her dedication to her job. She was finishing up with us at the end of next week and planned to travel around Australia before heading to Germany. I had shared a few conversations with her during the 3 months she had been with us. I found her to be honest and straightforward, but always promoting integrity. Once, one of the junior accountants was tempted to take shortcuts, but Iona quickly called it out, ensuring that everyone followed the rules. So, as I looked at Iona, seeing the serious expression on her face, I became curious. "What's up, Iona?" "You look serious. Is everything all right?" I asked. She hesitated for a second, looking over her shoulder out of the office at everyone. Then she frowned at something before looking back at me. "Thomas," Iona said very seriously, "I need to talk to you about something, but not here. Would you take me for lunch today?" Caught off guard, I became curious about what this might be. "Not a problem." "How about make your own?" "They have great options," I suggested, referring to a make-your-own sandwich shop that was quite popular. She nodded yes, but let's go to the one on the other side of William St. A, please. I must admit, I was curious why she wanted to go so far from the office, but I didn't question it. We sat down with our food, and Iona reached out and put a hand on my arm. I looked at her, raising an eyebrow. I would never have expected Iona to make any advances, and she knew I would never betray Candace. Seeing my raised eyebrow, Iona quickly withdrew her hand, blushing. "Sorry, Thomas," she said in her sweet high tone. She had just a tinge of the German accent. "It's just that what I have to say is going to be very hard for you to hear. I didn't think, forgive me. I felt my stomach knot. I wasn't sure what this was about, but suddenly knew it was going to bring trouble. I had only seen the look Iona was wearing once before in my life, the look I had when my grandparents and parents didn't return from overseas. I swallowed. "It's all right, Iona," I replied, trying to sound confident, though my lunch was now forgotten on the table in front of me. "But I have to admit, you have me worried. What's going on?" Over the next 20 minutes, Iona told me how she overheard George Saman talking last week to someone about how he was looking forward to spending time with everyone in 2 weeks' time. Iona blushed as she told me he got very detailed and agreed to meet the group labeled everyone for a coffee to plan their upcoming activities that evening. Then Iona stunned me as she told me she discreetly followed him, taking photos of George and other men interacting intimately with a mystery woman. She turned her phone towards me, her face filled with pain as she showed me the photo where it turned out the woman was my wife, Candace. I almost lost my half-eaten lunch, and Iona, a coworker, expressed her sympathy. She recognized the woman in the photo on my desk, who happened to be Candace, my wife, and me on our wedding day. I was devastated. I sat there in shock for a few moments before Iona reached out to touch my arm. "Thomas?" she said softly. "Are you okay?" I let out a sigh. "Yeah, sorry, Iona. Thanks for not asking if I'm all right, because I'm not," I replied, slumping in my chair. "I guess I should contact my lawyer." Iona frowned. "I wouldn't do that," she said. I looked at her, confused. "Why? Don't you usually need a lawyer in a divorce?" Iona fiddled with her phone for a moment before showing me another photo of everyone together. "Your lawyer is actually going with Mr. Saman and your wife next week. There are 5 people involved." "I'm sorry, Thomas." I groaned and leaned back in my chair. My chest tightened and panic started to set in. I looked at Iona. "Why?" I asked, even though I knew she didn't have the answer. "As far as I know, it's about money," she explained. "Money?" I repeated quietly. Yes, she confirmed, unsure of how to deliver such devastating news. I don't know the specifics, but they mentioned something about ensuring the money stays where it belongs, and this is their way of guaranteeing that. I had one of those light bulb moments, along with a sense of disbelief. Iona, I feel sick, I suddenly confessed. She nodded in understanding. I get it. I shook my head, determined to take action despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. No, I mean I need to make myself throw up, and you should go back to the office and tell everyone I'm unwell. Ask Mary to inform Candace that I'm sick and heading to the doctor to figure things out. Mary was our office manager and assisted us accountants. I stood up quickly, and Iona stood up with me. Iona, I can't thank you enough for telling me, I said, giving her a grateful smile. If it wasn't for you, I could have been trapped in a situation that I believe is impossible to win. Can you promise to keep this between us and share the story with Mary? Without hesitation, Iona nodded and quietly swore in German. Of course. I'm sorry, Thomas. I hope you don't hold it against me. I smiled and shook her hand. No, quite the opposite. I owe you big time. Whenever you need a favor in the future, just call me. You've made a lifelong friend today. She returned the smile, and we went our separate ways. I found a public bathroom and made myself vomit, wanting to make it believable. I called my doctor but hung up while on hold at the last minute. I didn't know who else could be involved in this plot. I called another doctor's office and scheduled an appointment for later. I took an Uber to a nearby bed and breakfast that I had always been interested in staying at. It was just a short walk from home, so I had never had a reason to visit, but today it served my purpose. After checking in, I laid down on the bed in my room, and shortly after, my phone rang. It was Candace. Are you feeling all right, baby? She asked, concern in her voice. Mary called and told me you're not doing well. Yeah, I'm okay, I replied, trying to downplay my sickness the way I usually would. I just got back from the doctor, and she thinks it's a stomach bug. I decided to check into this place for a few days so I don't pass it on to you before you leave for your conference. I could sense her frown over the phone, and she hesitated for a moment. I understand. Can I bring you anything? She asked, surprising me with her genuine concern. I thought for a moment. Yeah, could you bring me a couple of sets of clothes and my toiletries? If I'm going to be stuck here, I might as well be comfortable. You can leave them at the reception, and they'll bring it to my room. I already told them I'm not feeling well, and they're bringing me some chicken soup for dinner. Candace cooed. I wish I wasn't leaving so I could take care of you. I faked a cough. It's okay, Candace. I'll be better in a few days. We spoke for a few more minutes, and if I hadn't seen the pictures Anna showed me, I would have never suspected anything was wrong. As we hung up, I began to wonder if there could be another explanation. Luckily, I had my laptop with me, so I connected to the B&B Wisconsin FI and searched for private investigators. After speaking with a few agencies, I found one that was willing to meet me in the morning. I also called a different law firm, Bradman, Torrens & Clark. They were competitors of my lawyer, and I scheduled an appointment for 2 hours after meeting with the investigator. That night was restless. I slept for short intervals, waking up frequently. When Candace called in the morning, checking on me and making sure I received the clothes, she sounded genuinely concerned. It made me wonder if she was really having an affair. I trusted Iona, and the photos she showed me spoke for themselves. But I also wondered if maybe Candace had a look-alike that George Saman was involved with. In the morning, I let the reception at the B&B know I would be out and back later in the day. I wanted them to think I had a medical appointment if my wife called. I took an Uber to the private investigator's office, discreet investigators. I didn't have to wait long before a modest-looking man came out and took me to a quiet office. I was surprised when he checked the room for listening devices. After confirming it was safe, he had me recount my story. The man, who introduced himself as Norm, nodded as I told him what I had learned from Iona and showed him the pictures. Then he asked what I wanted. Mr. Other, we offer a range of services. Can you tell me specifically what you need? Norm inquired. I thought for a moment. I want both my wife and my boss surveilled. Photos, videos, and anything else relevant. If something suspicious is going on, I want to know about it before I take any action, I said, pausing before adding, and there's mention of money. I stand to inherit a significant trust fund in a few years, and I can't help but wonder if that's connected. Can I trust you with this information, especially considering the financial aspect? Norm studied me for a moment before smiling. Give me a moment, Mr. Other. He left the room briefly and returned with a stack of forms. I believe we can help you with everything you need, Mr. Other. These forms outline our rates and policies, including privacy and financial matters. As I quickly scanned the documents, I noticed they used the same lawyers I had an appointment with. I signed the forms, and we shook hands. Norm assured me he would have people following Candace and George by the end of the day. I agreed to cover all expenses, including travel, and left for my meeting with the lawyers who may become my new representation. Ranwick Johnstone had been our family lawyer for years, continuing the tradition from his grandfather. He had a small practice and had always been trusted. But after yesterday's shocking revelations, I wasn't going to sit back and wait for everything to collapse. I would take action and hopefully avoid any further damage to myself. This was why I had Damien Torrens of Bradman, Torrens and Clark ushering me into his office not 2 minutes after I arrived. Damien had been trying to get my business for years. A few years ago, Randy had required an extra pair of hands to help with an investment I wanted to do, and Damien had taken an interest, even offering to bring Randy on board at the partner level when he learned the details. So, Mr. Other, to what do we owe this rather sudden visit and without Mr. Johnstone? Damien asked me with that questioning stare that only lawyers could give. I have reason to believe that my wife, my boss, and my lawyer are conspiring against me, and I need to protect myself, I replied with just a hint of worry reflected in my voice. Lawyers are often portrayed as heartless, unfeeling individuals that charge a lot of money and care nothing about the people they represent. Damien Torrens was the epitome of that culture. He wore a very expensive 3-piece suit and sat in an opulent office designed to be intimidating. Upon hearing my statement, Damien stood and turned to look out the impressive view over Melbourne behind him. I heard him exhale, and over the next 20 minutes, I told my tale up to this meeting. You like to present a challenge, don't you, Mr. Other? He said, turning back to me, a shark's grin on his face. Look, he said, spreading his hands. If you are happy to bring your business over to our firm, regardless of the outcome with Mr. Johnstone, I will provide you an overall discount of 25% on our services for the next 3 years, and I will even throw in 100 of my billable hours for free to seal the deal. I looked at Damien for a minute, studying the man. Why? I asked plainly. Thomas, may I call you Thomas? I nodded. He did in return and sat back down. For us, holding your account means a lot. It's not just the amount of money in your trust. It's the business it brings with it. You are smart in how you manage your money, you choose good investments, and I know that if I get your business, several other large clients will end up coming our way. By giving you the incentive to move with us now while you are in trouble, it stops you shopping around and gives us both a longer-term benefit. I laughed. This guy was a great white shark, but he knew how to sell it. We spent the next hour ironing out details, and then he got his assistant to take me to another room where I signed my life away in triplicate. Admittedly, they made great coffee and brought me lunch at no cost. As I was finishing the forms, Damien popped his head in, smiling. Thomas, just letting you know that Norm from Discreet Investigation just reached out, and I let him know that you would call him back and confirm we're now representing you. Just a thought. You may also want Norm to tail Mr. Johnstone as well. I thought for a moment and nodded. Good idea. And Thomas? He said, a serious expression on his face, but that looked a lot less professional. Yeah? Would you be open to having brunch on Sunday morning? I mean, it's not like you want to get up to much in your usual circles until this is complete. I thought about it for a moment and agreed. The rest of the afternoon I spent back at the bed and breakfast, I started going through our accounts. There was nothing out of the ordinary with any of them. However, no longer being the trusting person I was not 24 hours ago, I set up a couple of alerts in case anything happened above $1,000 a day. That night I got an email from George telling me to get well soon and hoped I would be back in the office Monday. I got a call from Candace, that was all lovey-dovey, telling me how much she was missing me. I knew that if there was nothing to this, that I was going to have a lot of making up to do. But the thing that kept the doubt in the back of my mind was that at no point did Candace say she was looking at options to cancel her trip and stay to look after me. I got a call from Norm. He confirmed that he had monitoring on all 3 targets and now it was just a waiting game. In his experience, once a cheater had a pattern, they didn't change it unless they had to. Otherwise, it was more difficult to maintain the lie. Bottom line, he didn't expect anything until they left for the conference, if indeed they were getting together. Lastly, I got a text from Iona asking how I was. I replied that I was doing all right, but I was nervous to confirm what was really going on. By Saturday afternoon, my worst fears had been realized. The conference, if you could call it that, was a hotel a few hours out of Melbourne. The 5 of them had hired a suite and had not even bothered to close the blinds before they started their wild party. Norm's 3 investigators had met up with their tails and each found different places to view everything unfold. Within an hour, Candace was heavily involved and enjoying the company. Friends of mine were included in the mix. The surprise was my boss joining in. Over the next few hours, the group had different encounters in every imaginable way. Now, as I said at the start, Candace and I have an active love life. We had tried everything. Tongues, fingers, and both our bodies had explored various forms of intimacy, but that was between us. What I witnessed made me throw up several times. If you're into that sort of thing, fine, but not my wife, and not like that. Sunday morning, only a couple of days into their so-called conference, I woke and went back home to get ready for brunch at Damien's house, as we had arranged. As I walked into my apartment, I cringed as I looked around. Everywhere I looked, I saw places where Candace and I had shared intimate moments. But now I also saw each of her other partners in those places they had been when they visited us. I felt sick again, this time in the bathroom, before I had a quick shower and changed my clothes. I knew I was never going to stay in this place again. Candace had ruined my home regardless if she had entertained them here or not. An hour later, an Uber dropped me off at Damien's penthouse in the center of Melbourne. It was a beautiful apartment, and I met his wife, Mel, and his daughter, Colleen. For the next hour, the 3 of them entertained me. I was surprised that Colleen had an air of refinement about her, but a humility that I would not expect from the shark's daughter. After we had eaten a great brunch of potato hash browns with bacon and spinach and another amazing coffee, Colleen excused herself and left Damien, Mel, and myself to chat. I looked at Damien. The man before me in casual jeans and a t-shirt was the opposite to the take-no-prisoners lawyer I had met a few days before. He noticed and laughed when I told him of my thinking. "Thomas, it's all good," he said, repeating one of my favorite phrases. "At work, I need to be that man. I mean, my name is on the door, but after hearing your story, my invitation was an honest expression of potential friendship. I believe that you're a good man that has been treated unfairly by a number of people. When I told Mel of what was happening, she almost insisted that you come." The couple quickly exchanged a look and Mel nodded. "You see, Mel has been where you are once." I looked back at the pretty raven-haired woman. She nodded, then placed a hand on her husband's arm. Damien, in a very gentle gesture, placed his hand over the top of hers and encouraged her to speak. "Thomas, I get what you're going through," Mel began. "Several years ago, I had something similar happen to me. My first husband, Lawrence, betrayed me by getting involved with 2 other people," she said, blushing. I saw Damien squeeze her hand. She sighed. "I hope it's all right," she asked, looking at me. "But Damien shared just a little of what you're going through. He said the reports were graphic." I nodded. "Well, I understand that. When I found my first husband, Lawrence, I found him in our bed with 2 other people." "Oh," I said, "OHA." I repeated, wincing. She nodded. "I'm sorry," I said automatically, my mind going back to the images in my head of my wife with those 4 other people. I winced again. At the time, it was soul-destroying. I went wild. She told me, becoming somewhat lost in what was an old memory. I must have thrown half the house at the 3 of them in my rage, and then threw them out, still screaming in hysterics. I ended up visiting Damien's law firm for my divorce, and one of Damien's graduates handled it. "Is that how you met?" I asked. They both shook their heads. Damien smiled, looking at his wife. "My story is a little different," he told me. "I was engaged to be married, but Cherry, the woman I was engaged to, couldn't handle the long and unpredictable hours that I had as a named partner in a law firm. So, we split. Not the worst breakup, but a breakup nonetheless. It was about a month before the end of Mel's divorce that we met in a cafe downstairs. I was taken by her face and her pregnant belly. "You mean?" I asked, looking at Mel as she blushed. They both nodded at me. "Yeah, Colleen is Lawrence's daughter," Mel explained. "I found out a few weeks after everything went down." "It didn't change anything for me," Damien said. "I adopted Colleen without a moment's hesitation when she turned 2 and Mel and I married. Lawrence was happy to sign the adoption papers as it meant no child support for him." We sat for a moment, the couple letting me digest what was being said. I looked back at them after sipping my coffee again. "So what happened to Lawrence?" I asked. Damien snorted. During the year that followed, he got really sick from several health issues. We haven't followed up on him in a while, but last we heard, he was living in a shared house working the service desk for one of the major telecom companies. Then he sighed. "But if it makes him happy, then good on him. But he should have been honest with Mel." Mel squeezed his hand again and looked at him lovingly. "Yes, but it did bring you and me together." "I can't complain about that if it caused me a little pain," Mel said. "There is that," was Damien's almost guarded reply. We talked for a little while later, and Colleen came back out and spent some time with us before heading back in to call her friends on Discord. "So what about you, Thomas?" Mel asked after getting us each a fresh coffee. Mel, I learned, made a great coffee. A few years ago, she had taken a barista course and she really knew how to put a cappuccino together. I looked over at Damien and raised an eyebrow. He smiled, waving his hand dismissively. "You're not on the clock," he told me, smiling. "This is honestly just new friends showing some concern for someone they want to support." I smiled, what felt like the first genuine smile I had given since everything went down. Honestly, I looked down into my coffee, almost like they were tea leaves that could give me a direction for the future. "I don't know. I assume that Damien has told you I stand to inherit a lot of money in a few years?" Mel shook her head and smiled. "No, he just told me you were in a bad spot and a bit about your wife cheating on you with multiple people." I looked at Damien and he smiled. His expression let me know to tell my own story. "Well," I said, taking a deep breath, "Candace and I have been married for a few years. We were talking about starting a family soon, but then one of the interns where I work brought it to my attention that my wife was cheating on me. It turns out that it was with my boss, her boss, my former lawyer." Damien smiled at that. "And a friend of mine. Candace has been going out to these conferences for a couple of years, so I can only guess that it's been going on that long. What I have seen from the reports, video and pictures so far shows deceit and betrayal that is at the very least similar to your ex-husband." I blushed a little at the admission. "So I guess first for me is to clean house. They all have to go." I watched for a moment as the expression of determination and motivation crossed Damien's face. He saw me catch the expression, and this time he blushed. I paused. "It's all right, Damien. You can enjoy the challenge," I told him. He laughed. I sighed again, looking from my coffee to the couple in front of me and then out over the balcony to stare at the city. The city was quiet for a weekend, and I felt peaceful. "I guess the first thing I need is to get the complete report from Norm." Damien nodded in agreement. "Then I will enforce the full prenuptial agreement with Candace and take legal action against everyone involved." Damien laughed at that, but Mel frowned. "Thomas," she said, leaning forward, "I get that you need to do those things, but what about you personally? You said you have money, so for this group of people to betray you, your money must have something to do with it. But from what I am hearing, your situation is much worse than what happened with my ex-husband. You have been betrayed by everyone. I struggled with feeling inadequate for some time, and with what you have told me, I am sure it's going to be a lot worse for you." She paused a moment and looked at me, her eyes soft and caring. "Sorry, I guess it hasn't hit you yet in that way," she told me. "It took me a few weeks, but you're going to need help, you're going to need support, and you are going to need a therapist," Mel told me without holding back. I shrugged. "I suppose," I said, turning again to look out at the cityscape. "I mean it, Thomas," she said. "If you will let us, I'd like Damien and I to be there for you." "Damien is great at work," I smiled, still looking at the city. "But I can tell you he chooses his friends carefully. That you're here this morning with us shows that my husband thinks highly of you." I turned back to the couple, surprise written on my face. Damien blushed slightly and shrugged. "I don't make friends easily," he told me. "You're like me in that you are successful, knowledgeable, and you generally don't stand for nonsense." He glanced at his wife. "When you told me your story, I thought of what Mel went through, and I thought we might be able to be there for you." I was touched. I never thought this guy would have a softer side or that a lawyer would care. We spent the next couple of hours talking openly about my situation. Mel kept bringing up the emotional impact side of things, and by the time I left to check into a new bed and breakfast in another part of the city, I felt a lot more emotional about what I was starting to go through, but I also knew for the first time that I had support. I spoke to Candace for a few minutes when she called later that evening. She again spoke normally to me like nothing was wrong. When I got the report from Norm for that time, I could time match her phone call with a video of her with Randy doing things that were really unpleasant. Damien advised me that I should continue to go into the office and act as normal as possible until he could get as much of the legal paperwork ready as possible. I tried, but I think everyone knew something was wrong. It was perhaps late Tuesday morning when Iona came in and sat on my desk. She looked at me. "Thomas, you look awful. So you found out there's something happening?" She asked questioningly but quietly, trying not to talk too loudly. I nodded slowly. "I'm guessing from your mood that it's worse than we spoke about?" She said like she was expecting it. I nodded again. I sat back on my chair, willing myself not to break down. "I'm sorry, Thomas, I really am," she said compassionately. "I am sorry that it was me that told you. I feel ashamed." In her German accent, the word ashamed came across a lot sadder than when said in an Aussie accent. I looked back at her. "Don't be," I told her, feeling my determination to fight my way out of this grow as I watched her trying to understand something of my pain. "If it weren't for you, I would still be clueless about what's really going on." "What do you mean?" she asked. I pulled up the definition of infidelity and explained to her, trying to keep the details of the unpleasant scenes I had seen less explicit. Even without hearing everything, she had tears in her eyes by the end. It was good that I had an office because if we were sitting on the main floor, we would attract even more attention. I wondered not for the first time if anyone out there knew whether William Zacks, the other owner of Seaman and Zacks, knew about the affair. Iona asked if I would meet her for dinner that night because she couldn't keep it together if I took her out to lunch and told her more details. I agreed that we would go out a few hours after work. She had 4 days left, including today, before she finished her paid internship, so she wanted to leave well. I will admit that later in the afternoon, I got a strange look from our office manager, Mary, as I passed her in the hallway. She was in a meeting with William for a few hours in the afternoon as I pretended to work for the rest of the day. Later in the evening, I had dinner with Iona, telling her pretty much everything. She was shocked at how I was being treated and asked what I would do. I tried to stay non-committal, but she also knew me well enough to know I wouldn't stand for Candace or the others treating me so badly. The next few days proceeded as normal. Well as they could when your life is turning itself inside out. I worked, ate, sort of slept, and I kept changing the bed and breakfast I was staying at each night. Now just a little paranoid that someone might know where I was laying my head. Norm called me Thursday afternoon and asked to meet with me that evening. When I arrived, I was surprised to find Damien already there, a serious look on his face. As the three of us sat down and I looked at the two men, my heart sank. "That bad, huh?" I asked, trying to be lighthearted, but my heart really wasn't in it. Norm nodded. "I asked Damien here because it's been noticed that you're not performing at work. It's gotten back to your boss, and he's been talking to your wife. Our team managed to get a few audio extracts with a special microphone." My heart sank. Thinking back over the past few days, I could now see that both William and Mary were, to some degree, aware of what was happening and had been talking to George. If I thought that was the end of it, I was mistaken. Norm cleared his throat and pulled my attention back to the moment. "I'm sorry, but it's worse than what you have seen so far. You mean my wife fooling around with my boss, her boss, my lawyer, and my friend, and at least more people at my workplace know, and it is worse than that." I asked with a note of disdain in my voice. Norm didn't take it personally. He nodded, unfortunately. He started, then stopped. "I invited Damien tonight because he's acting as your new lawyer. So far, I have only been sharing extracts with him as he prepares everything, but with what today's report shows, I think he needs to be in on our next steps. I looked between both men. I spoke with Damien several times this week as my new lawyer and a new friend. I had even spoken with Mel a couple of times. I was rapidly growing to trust the man. Sure, Damien is in the inner circle, I told my PI. What's happening? What have you heard that makes it worse than what we have seen so far? Norm stared me straight in the face as he said the next line that, in a week that had knocked me about, just about took me out for the count. They're talking about how they can harm you in about 3 years. What? Both Damien and I said at the same time. Norm nodded. Not right away. However, twice now we have overheard the group talking about removing you in a couple of years and splitting your trust up between the 5 of them. I sat back, stunned, then looked at my investigator. How? They haven't got a method yet, Norm told us like he was reporting the news. But they have talked about an accident, which they are not keen on. They are favoring slow harm by your wife through putting something in your food. Stunned was the wrong word, shell-shocked was closer to the truth. The only good news here is that they are talking in the future tense. They don't have a real plan yet, but apparently they talk about it each time. Your friend Roger is apparently a chemist. I nodded my head. And he has said he can make a compound that would slowly harm you. Sorry guys, but I couldn't finish. Both men nodded in agreement. Your wife, for her part, appears somewhat reluctant. I do believe in some weird and warped way that she cares for you, but she does sound willing to go through with it to get her hands on some of your money directly. But why? I whined more than I wanted to. We're married, and once it belonged to me, it would have belonged to us. Why would she try to do this? She knows I would never have restricted her. Norm shrugged. People do stupid things when money is concerned. Look, the key point here is that they haven't done anything yet. I believe that they want your wife to have your child and wait till you get full access to the trust so that it smooths the way. My team are still in place, Norm told us. They're still listening, and honestly, they are just as disturbed as what you are likely feeling now. All 3 have requested counseling after this assignment and are all seasoned professionals. We discussed some more details, and Norm produced a USB drive with more videos, pictures, and audio for Damien and me. Damien told me he would have the initial paperwork ready next week, which included the divorce paperwork using a copy of the prenuptial agreement. The submissions would have me sue both Seaman and Zach's, Candace's workplace, and each cheater the following week. He had even spoken with a real estate agent who was keen to sell the apartment. Once I gave the go-ahead, he felt it could be sold very quickly. With the revelation of their plans to harm me at some point in the future, Damien also noted that he would talk with the police about a conspiracy to commit harm. He had prepared restraining orders for each of them that they had to stay as far away from me as possible. In the end, I decided on a plan that kept them in the dark as long as possible, giving me enough time to extricate myself from the initial fallout. It did mean that I would have to swallow my pride at work until the end of the week. However, after that, all chaos would break loose, and I would never set foot in that place again. We spent a little more time planning, and I even got a call from Candace while we were talking. I let it go to voicemail, telling them I would call her back later to keep up appearances. We had a going-away party at work for Iona the next day. She had successfully completed her internship and was looking forward to heading north for her next journey step. Over cake and coffee, she quietly asked how I was, and I shook my head. She asked if we could meet for a drink after work, and I smiled. I pushed hard for the rest of the day and caught up on some work. By quitting time, I got a few smiles from William and Mary as I submitted my work, seeming back on track. Over drinks that night, without giving details, I told Iona that it was getting worse and that it was a good thing she would not be at Seaman and Zach's much longer. She took the hidden meaning, and while we spoke, Mel called me. "Hey Thomas, how are you?" she asked, concern in her voice. All things considered, all right, I told her while Iona looked at me wondering whom I was talking to. I have a plan, and your husband is eagerly waiting to get things started. I heard Mel laugh on the other end of the line, and Iona looked at me quizzically. Look, what I was calling for is that Damien and I were planning a trip down to see the penguins down near Phillip Island tomorrow, and I was wondering if you would like to come. Now, before you say no, I want to tell you that you should come because you need to get out and be around friends that can help you through this. I smiled on my end, then looked at Iona, patiently waiting for me. Sure, Mel, would you mind if I brought a friend along? I asked. Iona looked at me. I heard Mel laugh. Sure, what's her name? Merriness in her voice. Iona, she's the one that got me clued in. We spoke for another minute and agreed on times and locations to meet up. As I hung up, Iona continued to look at me questioningly. Did you just ask me on a date by proxy on a call to another woman? She asked. When she said it, I think she saw the panic on my face. Her countenance broke and she laughed. Relax, Thomas, Iona told me, placing a hand on my arm. I understand you just need friends right now. Where are we going? And did I hear the word penguins? The next morning, at 7:30, Iona and I met Damien, Mel, and Colleen at a service station outside of town. I was surprised when they turned up in a canary yellow 2019 Mustang. I heard the big V8 before I saw it, and I was impressed and then surprised as it pulled up alongside my own 2020 V8 Mach 1 in gunmetal gray. I knew there was a reason I liked you. I smiled as I greeted Damien. Mel and Iona smiled as both Damien and I spent the next few minutes talking Mustangs before we realized we hadn't introduced the ladies to each other. Sorry, Damien, Mel, Colleen, this is Iona. Iona, this is Damien, Mel, and Colleen. Damien is my new lawyer. They shook hands. Well, Mel hugged Iona and we got on the road. Have you ever wondered what sounds better than a big block V8 screaming down the on-ramp to the highway? Well, it's two big blocks heading the same way and having a great time doing it. By the time we made it over to Phillip Island, I had a smile a mile wide on my face. Damien was a cheeky driver, and the top dog lawyer in him wanted to play. So we did. Iona, for her part, was having a ball. We chatted on the drive in between singing out the lyrics to Black Betty, the remake by Spiderbait. Throughout the day, we had a great time with the penguins. All of us had been to see them before, but let's face it, penguins are cute anytime you see them. We had a great lunch of fish and chips while sitting on the rocks, and I felt good knowing that I could have friends that would have my back. I was also surprised that Iona had her hand in mine by the end of the day. It felt natural, like it was meant to be there. I must have blushed a few times when she looked at me. I was still married, and even though my wife was betraying me, I told myself I was still married, and loyalty meant a lot to me. About a half hour before we headed back, Colleen had convinced Iona and Damien to take her for a walk back to the penguins, and I smelled a setup as Mel and I followed behind. She likes you, you know, she said as we walked behind the other three. I nodded. I know I kind of like her too, but... Mel put her hand on my arm as we walked. I know Thomas. She does too. Iona and I talked about it earlier. Originally, she was going to head up to Queensland for a month before looking for her next job, but she told me she would like to wait around to be there for you for the next month. She doesn't have a lot of savings, but she wants to be there for you. I think the surprise showed on my face, and at that moment, Iona turned back and smiled at me. It froze as she realized what we were talking about. Then she got an even bigger smile as I smiled back, and she turned her attention back to Colleen as we approached the penguins. Mel laughed, see. The trip home was almost as fun as the trip down, just a little more subdued. At one point, I noticed a tavern on the Waze map up ahead, and I called Damien and let him know that Iona and I would stop for a bit. Mel piped in, telling us to have a good time, and Damien, Colleen, and Mel all thanked us for coming and spending the day with them. I was surprised that the conversation with Iona was light and flowing during our return trip, and as we parked and made our way into the tavern. It was early evening in summer. Twilight was lasting a while at the moment as we got a window seat and looked over the menus. We ordered drinks and food. I was going to treat myself to a full rack of bourbon ribs, and Iona ordered a chicken parmigianin. That's a schnitzel with cheese, chips, and sauce. I felt the mood get serious for a moment. Thomas? The question was implied. I looked at her. I've mentioned some of the general physical traits of this woman who is in the process of saving my life, but in detail, Iona is German-born and was raised in Germany until she was 4, and her parents immigrated to Australia. She was a natural with numbers and is doing a postgraduate degree while interning around the country in short bursts to see Australia before finding a place to settle down. Physically, Iona is quite petite, only 5'2". She has long blonde hair and the sweetest face with deep blue eyes that I couldn't help but get lost in as my marriage was falling apart. She dresses modestly at work, but today I found myself admiring how nicely her jeans fit her. As she reached over and held my hands, I could feel her soft and gentle touch, a sign of genuine affection, not just friendship or desire. I have a good idea of what you and Mel were discussing. I know you're going through a tough time right now and need a friend more than anything else. She paused for a moment, taking a hesitant breath. So that's what I want to be for you right now, a friend above all else. She looked away, still holding my hands. But we've known each other for a while now, and as we've gotten closer these past few weeks, I've realized there could be something more. I think. No, I know. I like you more than just a friend. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? I smiled, touched by her words. This woman was putting herself out there, letting me know she had feelings for me beyond friendship, even knowing that I was going through a difficult time. Iona. I began to say, then paused. Her face fell, crushed by my hesitation. I could tell she thought I was rejecting her. I squeezed her hands. Iona, you are an incredible woman, and you're absolutely right. Right now, I need friends more than anything else. But if I'm being honest with you, beneath all the chaos I'm feeling, I also have feelings for you. I left the rest unsaid. Most of the time, happiness can quickly turn to despair, and it's much easier for our world to crumble beneath us than it is to climb towards the light. But Iona defied that norm. In an instant, her worried expression transformed into a look of pure joy. Her smile stretched from ear to ear, and her big blue eyes shone with adoration. For the rest of the evening, we talked about our interests, favorite movies, music, and of course, cars. I shared the story of losing my parents and grandparents, and her eyes widened when I mentioned my trust fund. So why are you working at Simon & Zach's? She asked shortly after I finished. I shrugged my shoulders. Originally, I planned to be there for a couple of years to gain experience, I explained. I thought about exploring different fields like you do, and I even discussed starting an investment company with my dad down the line, but I ended up staying after they passed away. Mentioning my parents' death in relation to my trust fund cast a melancholic tone over our conversation. I'm sorry, Thomas. When I look at you, I don't see some spoiled rich guy. I see a focused man who doesn't tolerate nonsense, yet remains humble, she said sincerely. I chuckled. Thank you. I mean it. You're a good person, she insisted. You haven't lost control or sought revenge on them, referring to my wife and her lovers. No, not like they're planning to do to me, I replied sadly, without thinking. What? She exclaimed, her eyes wide. I realized what I had accidentally said and proceeded to narrate the high-level conversation my private investigator had discovered. They were planning to kill me in a few years' time and divide the money amongst themselves after I fathered a child with Candace. Iona was shocked and tearful by the end of it. You're going to do something about it, right? I'm not a lawyer, but that has to be a crime, she whispered, her fingers gripping my arm tightly. She was worried, and for a moment I thought she might start searching for assassins. I nodded. Damien is handling it. Everything will be resolved at the end of next week. She let go of me. Sorry, but Thomas, your wife is plotting your murder, she exclaimed, her voice almost hysterical. We talked for a few more minutes, and as we walked back to my car, she held onto my arm, occasionally glancing around nervously. It's all right, Iona, I assured her, taking her hand and linking it through my arm. I doubt there's anyone watching, but if there is, I have a fast car here. We can outrun them. My words made her laugh, and the rest of the drive home was quieter. When I dropped her off, Iona hugged me tightly. We both blushed and smiled, understanding the potential for more in our relationship. As I drove away, I couldn't help but smile. I sang along with the radio on my way back to the new bed and breakfast I had checked into, and I felt some of the pain in my heart begin to dissipate, thanks to Damien, Mel, and Colleen, but even more so, thanks to Iona. I was a couple of streets away when my phone rang. It was Candace. I could tell she was in a bar. Darling, she said, sounding concerned. Where are you? I've been trying to reach you all afternoon. I realized I hadn't returned her call. I'm sorry, Candace. I ended up going to Phillip Island with some friends and their daughter to see the penguins today. It was a spontaneous trip, and I got a bit distracted. I felt the tension in her voice ease. Oh, okay. I was worried for a moment. "Did you have a good time?" she asked, now that the issue of me not responding was resolved. It was amazing. Seeing the penguins with kids is a whole different experience I shared, letting the genuine joy I felt while watching Colleen with the penguins flow through our conversation. They bring a different kind of happiness. I wasn't lying. Watching Colleen interact with the penguins was truly joyful. She loved feeding them the small fish, and at one point, a group of penguins followed her around, making all of us laugh. "Ah, Dabubio," hearing that even gets me excited, she said, attempting to sound sultry. I tried not to cringe. Maybe we can start thinking about having a baby of our own when I return. You've made me a bit clucky, right? I thought, have a baby so you can harm me. We'll see, Candace. How is the conference going? Are you enjoying yourself? I changed the topic. Oh yes, the conference has been fantastic. We've been working hard, she said, unaware of the innuendo in her words. And yeah, a group of us, including my boss, are going out for drinks. Don't worry, my boss is keeping an eye on me, so no one can take advantage of me. I bet, I thought, as if that woman has any virtue left. After that, I lost interest in the conversation and let her talk while I half listened. She ended the call with an "I love you," but I'm not sure if she noticed that once again, I didn't reciprocate the sentiment. During the following week, I arrived at work early every day to stay on top of my workload. With what was about to happen, I didn't want to leave any of my clients hanging. I had a feeling that both Mary and William were involved in something related to George and Candace, but I didn't know what. As the week went on, I noticed they stared at me less and less while I focused on my tasks. I moved to another bed and breakfast every couple of days. Despite appearances, I was paranoid even before I discovered the conspiracy to end my life. Afterward, I was just as unnerved as Iona, so changing locations frequently seemed like the best course of action. Most nights that week, I spent time with Iona. We had dinner together, and she helped me pack up my and Candace's belongings in my apartment. My things were going to a storage unit in a company I had invested in, with no charge. Candace's belongings would be moved to a different location with payment for 60 days, giving her a couple of months to sort everything out. I showed Iona a couple of pictures from the private investigator's report one evening as we were packing the kitchen, and she immediately ran to the bathroom and got sick. I think it was from seeing explicit photos that even professional actors would hesitate to perform. When she returned, she was furious and hugged me tightly while criticizing my soon-to-be ex-wife for her behavior. Monday morning arrived. It was the day of reckoning. The cheaters would return early in the afternoon, and I would be flying off to Cairns in North Queensland for a month. I walked into work that morning as if it were any other day. I attended the staff meeting where William announced George's return. For the first time since I learned about the situation, I noticed Mary staring at me as William spoke. I made a mental note to inform Damien about this for the conspiracy charges, if they were a part of it. Shortly before lunchtime, a group invited me to join them for lunch, but I politely declined. After they left, I wiped my laptop clean and walked out, leaving my keys and swipe cards on my desk. I wanted to leave my resignation letter, but Damien's team would deliver it later in the afternoon. As I walked out of the office, the driver of a corporate car welcomed me, and we headed to the airport. Iona hugged me that I had grown to cherish. When we arrived at the airport, Damien and Mel were there to see us off. I handed my phone to my lawyer, and he gave me a new phone with a new number. Only a few people knew the number, and it would stay that way for a while. Iona and I flew business class to Cairns, enjoying some sparkling juice as we reached cruising level. I knew that Candace was arriving home around the same time, along with the other cheaters. Upon disembarking, another driver greeted us and took us to the cozy bed and breakfast we had booked for the first week of our stay. I had grown fond of B&Bs, and this one was especially beautiful. It was run by an older couple who had been together for 40 years. They had built the house when prices were low and now ran the bed and breakfast for enjoyment and companionship. In the mornings, they served us a delicious breakfast with bacon, eggs, tomato, toast, beans, and spinach. The coffee wasn't as good as what we had back home, but it was decent. However, the view from the house was breathtaking. We loved watching the colors of the sunset reflect on the water as the waves gently touched the pathway across the road. The room that Iona and I shared had a spacious king-size bed and a luxurious attached bathroom with a double shower and whirlpool tub. The owners had recently remodeled the place and now had 2 king rooms and 4 superior rooms. We were fortunate to have chosen one of the king rooms for our stay. Being the only guests for the first 2 days, we cherished the moments of intimacy we shared. And intimacy? Wow, Iona, let me tell you about it. On the drive from the airport to the bed and breakfast, I turned on my phone and saw a message from Damien. It's done, chaos everywhere, but you're a free man now. Turn off your phone and I'll talk to you in a few days. I followed his instructions, and that night, I felt a sense of nervousness for the first time. Both Iona and I were aware that we would be sharing the same bed, and we were concerned about our expectations of each other. But there was no need to worry. We took separate showers, and as I climbed into bed and started reading a book from the library downstairs, Iona emerged from the bathroom and captivated my attention. So let's take a step back. Iona, she's a petite, beautiful woman with long blonde hair, a lovely face, expressive blue eyes, and a curvy body, right? Actually, no. As Iona stood there, illuminated by the bathroom light, I was stunned. I dropped the book one was reading, and as it hit my excited state, I couldn't take my eyes off her. The woman who risked so much to inform me about Candace's betrayal was now revealing her own attraction to me, which had been growing for months. She walked towards me, I stood up, and we shared a passionate hug. Through that simple connection of our body, we conveyed feelings of friendship, desire, and dare I say it, even love. When we pulled apart, we looked into each other's eyes. I love you, Iona confessed. I love you too, Iona, I replied instantly, and I truly meant it. I had wrestled with these feelings over the past week, questioning how I could fall in love so quickly while still in the midst of betrayal and being married. But Iona was more than just a physical attraction. She was my friend above all else. She had no idea about my wealth until I disclosed it to her, and she was angered on my behalf when she learned what was planned against me. I'll be honest, I didn't know if this love would last, but Iona was there for me when I needed her. We desired each other, so who was I to resist the touch of a beautiful woman? Get close to me, Thomas, she whispered breathlessly. I stood there, momentarily stunned. We spent a really good time together. Thank you, I whispered. She looked up at me, a smile gracing her lips. Thank you for what? She asked. For everything, in general. Thank you for having the courage to speak up, even though it placed you in a difficult position. Thank you for being my friend and caring about me without pressure. And lastly, thank you for giving yourself to me. That was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had, and if that is just fun, I cannot wait to get close to you. Iona beamed, her eyes shining with joy. Thomas, I've only been with 2 other men before, and neither of them came close to what you just gave me. Did you feel it? I nodded, overwhelmed with emotions. Right now I can feel your essence within me. The next morning, I woke up to the feeling of her presence. I smiled as Iona continued to playfully tease me. Good morning, baby. How are you feeling? She asked, noticing I was awake. Amazing. Last night was... Wow. Seriously, Iona, it was incredible, I replied, reaching out to touch her face. She beamed at the compliment. Then it worked, she nodded happily. What worked? I asked, a little confused. You forgot about your past, and you claimed me as yours. And I am yours now, Thomas, as long as you'll have me. My heart and soul belong to you, she said, looking into my eyes. I pulled her close and hugged her. She sighed contently. And I am yours as well, Iona. Last night you showed me a level of trust and love that usually takes a lot of time for couples to reach. I'm falling in love with you faster than I thought possible. We got dressed and went out for breakfast, walking slowly as Iona adjusted to her slight soreness. Our hosts greeted us warmly and gave us knowing looks. The next few days were magical. Iona and I enjoyed exploring the local food scene. We visited the breathtaking Daintree rainforest, went on a steam train ride and a cable car ride. We even went snorkeling on the Great Barrier Reef. And of course, we continued to get close. By the end of the first week, I had completely forgotten about my phone. It wasn't until Damien and Mel came to visit with Colleen that I remembered it. We had planned for them to stay with us for the second week, and Damien had an interesting story to share. Well, Things have definitely gotten a bit messy, he said with a smirk as Colleen went back to her room to watch a movie. He leaned in closer. In total, 9 people have been arrested for plotting to harm you. What? Iona and I exclaimed simultaneously. Damien chuckled. Yeah, he confirmed. From the information we gathered, your former boss, your soon-to-be ex-wife, the office manager at your old workplace, the other owner, and 2 others at Candace's workplace were all involved. I sat back, shocked. 9 people wanted me gone? I asked with disbelief, sort of. Damien explained. They all admitted that they had no personal issues with you. In fact, they all said you were really nice. But they had made an agreement to benefit financially from your trust after your passing. They all tried to blame each other, except for Candace. She broke down when she found out you were gone, and she's currently receiving help at the hospital, he continued. I personally delivered your resignation and the notice that you're suing your former workplace. Damien shared, a satisfied grin on his face. They have shut down the business and all employees have been suspended. It's a similar situation at Candace's workplace. Oh, and I also personally witnessed the arrest of Mr. Ranwick Johnstone. That was quite fulfilling. No charge for that, he said with a wink, making us laugh. What about Roger? I asked, concerned. He was also arrested. His wife thought he was out of town for work, not involved with someone else's spouse. I called her and offered our legal services pro bono. It felt like the least we could do. Mel playfully hit Damien. Stop teasing them, baby. We all chuckled and spent the next hour getting more details. At one point, Mel looked at us holding hands and commented, Well, you 2 didn't waste any time, did you? She said knowingly. Iona blushed and looked at me, and then at Damien and Mel. I made him mine on our first night together, she confessed. And I've made sure he always sees a part of me unclothed before he leaves the room. I don't think he's had a chance to think about those idiots. Besides, I think he enjoys making me walk funny the next day. Damien snorted and Mel laughed. As for me, I just grinned like a fool. Mel looked at me. I think you're going to be just fine, Thomas, she said, looking between Iona and me. She's a keeper. They stayed with us for the following week, and we went on day trips together, visited the casino, and even took a light plane trip up the Daintree coast. At the end of the week, they returned to Melbourne, and we flew to Brisbane. Iona introduced me to her parents in Brisbane as her boyfriend, and I embraced the role. Back in the city, we caught up on the news one night and learned about the conspiracy plot to harm me in the future. They didn't mention my name, but when Iona told her parents it was me, they nearly panicked until we explained the whole story. More honest and trustworthy people I have yet to meet once we went through our journey with them. We spent another week seeing the sights around Brisbane and then another week in Sydney. By the time a month had gone by, neither Iona nor myself could see being without the other. We talked about marriage and kids towards the end of the trip. I told her that once I was divorced, we would get engaged. It wasn't a traditional proposal, but she loved me all the same, knowing when the time came, I would make a special gesture for her. When the topic of kids came up, she blushed. Thomas, I have a confession to make, she said, holding on to me after we had spent a romantic night in our hotel room overlooking the Sydney Harbour Bridge. It's possible I could be expecting, she said shyly, trying to gauge my reaction. She sighed. Until we had our special moment, I never really thought about birth control, but for this past month we've been together constantly and neither of us has even thought about birth control. My monthly cycle is due in a few days and we will know then. She again looked at me searchingly. Are you mad? I chuckled. No, I've thought about it a few times. Every morning over the next week, I woke up with my gorgeous blonde partner showering me with affection. When her period finished, we expressed our love for one another at least once a day wherever we were. Eventually, though, we ended our holiday and headed back to Melbourne. We stayed the night at Iona's place. She had managed to get the landlord to let her keep it for another few months in place of her initial plans to travel north. It was a cozy apartment about a half an hour outside town. After staying in all the lovely accommodations all over the country for the past month, Iona was a little embarrassed by her place. I reassured her and spent the next half hour walking through the place and asking silly questions about everything. By the end, she was giggling and coming up with playful answers. The next day, we headed to Damien's office. Iona and I worked from there, looking into some new places to live. At lunchtime, Mel brought us both a coffee. "Mel, what are you doing here?" Iona asked. She touched the side of her nose. "A little bird told me you two were in here, so I thought I would come by and see how you're doing and bring you a coffee, made fresh, of course." She set them down, then took a sip of her own coffee when Iona sighed. "What's wrong, Iona?" Mel asked, picking up the concern in her sigh. Iona shrugged. "Not doing so well, Mel. He hasn't gotten me pregnant yet." Within moments, Mel was spluttering coffee on the meeting room table. "Sorry?" I laughed. "Iona and I are going to try for a baby. After the past month, we just thought we would see if it happened." "That's fast," Mel said, perhaps a little concerned. We both nodded at our friend. "Perhaps," Iona said dismissively though. "But it's still fun practicing. And there is no one in this world I would rather have a child with," she said, looking back at me adoringly. Mel looked between us, her gaze studying us, and suddenly shrugged. Then she asked us what we were doing in the office. Once she knew we were looking for a home, she was all in. For the next couple of hours, she worked with us, helping us to figure out our wants and needs, locations, and what we might need if we were going to have a child. At one point, Damien stopped by on his way to court and smiled at me as he heard the two women talking about kitchens. Over the next month, we saw a few places, and in the end, we had it down to 3 apartments and a house. Iona respected my opinion as she said it was my money and she would be happy as long as I was there with her. I responded that this was going to be our place and we would choose it together. In the end, we chose a stunning apartment on a high floor in a slightly older building on the lower end of Collins Street. It had easy access to major streets, quick access to public transport, and like everything in Melbourne, it was a short walk to great food. The apartment itself was magnificent. It had 3 lovely bedrooms plus a large master. It had great views of Melbourne Park, think the tennis and Australian Open. The building had a pool, sauna, and gym, along with a 24-hour concierge. We had 2 parking spots, and I was able to park my Mustang and a new Jeep that I bought Iona. All in all, it was like a scaled-up bed and breakfast that we could call home. The place had some furniture, but with Mel's help, we made it truly feel like ours. Within the month we were settled in, it was a good thing too, as Iona's monthly cycle never came that month. It's now almost 9 months since everything started. Iona is now 6 months along with our baby boy. We've settled into the apartment, and it feels like every surface is baby-proofed. We've turned one of the rooms into a nursery, another into a guest bedroom, and the third into a study for our work. On the work front, Iona and I started a new investment business. We're small at the moment with only a couple of million to invest as I'm still a couple of years away from getting my trust. But Iona is talented with numbers and she has a good head on her shoulders. She owns 10% of the new venture. She said she wanted nothing, but I got Mel to convince her. Honestly, to date, it's the only disagreement we've had. I currently own 70%, we have an investor with 15%, and the last 5% is owned by Damien and Mel. They have become very close friends, and it never ceases to amaze me to see the differences between Damien the lawyer and Damien my friend. As a lawyer on my side, he has been incredibly helpful. He managed to get judgments against both my and Candace's old workplaces. Both companies have now gone out of business, but at the time of everything happening, they both had a lot of liquid funds, so he tells me there is a significant settlement coming for both Iona and myself. He also got Roger's wife a victory, where almost all the assets went to her since he is now in prison for the next 30 years, along with pretty much anyone involved in the plot to harm me. I received one communication from William and George asking for mercy, which I promptly ignored in front of Damien as he showed me a smile. Lastly, he had immense pleasure dismantling my former lawyer on the witness stand during his trial. Now, I haven't mentioned Candace too much up to this point, not because she got away with things. In fact, she ended up being sentenced to 35 years without parole. The only people in the court who felt sorry for her when the verdict was read were her parents. However, after hearing what she had done and what she planned to do, I think even then, it was a close thing with their support. The trial judge immediately granted the divorce based on the crimes against me. He noted his disgust at their behavior and for destroying so many lives. Based on the prenuptial agreement, Candace walked away with her belongings and a small sum of money to start her life over again. I put that in an interest-bearing trust for when she got out of prison. Due to her mental breakdown, she was not present in the court case. She was still in the secure mental ward and was due to be transferred to the medical ward in a medium-security prison within a month of her sentencing. Her only request was that I come to see her once she was settled. I agreed on the condition that it did not impede the divorce. 6 weeks later, I was sitting in a secure meeting room in the medical wing of the prison Candace was being held at. The room was simple, with a bolted-down table, changed chairs, and one of those one-way mirrors you always see in movies. I had been sitting for perhaps 10 minutes when a doctor and a guard brought my former wife in. She looked disheveled. Her usually neat hair was messy. It looked like she had tried to brush it in some places but not others. Next were her eyes. They darted around the room as if she was looking for something. It didn't look like she was threatened, but like she was searching for threats. When she saw me, it was like her focus narrowed, and an eerie calm came over her. The doctor frowned but retreated to a corner. The third and most obvious thing was that my former wife was very, very pregnant. I was captivated by her belly when she sat down, and Candace smiled. "I'm actually almost a week overdue, Thomas," she told me as she stroked her swollen belly. "They tell me that if I don't go into labor with our baby within 24 hours, they will need to induce me. Is that all right, Thomas? Our baby Candace?" I caught a signal from the doctor and stopped. "That's fine, Candace," I told her. "Let them induce you so you can have the baby." She seemed relieved. "Thomas, I need you to know that I never wanted to see you dead. I didn't care about your money. But they all convinced me," Candace told me sadly. "They told me after we had your child, that would be the time. I didn't want to do anything to you, but they told me if I didn't, they would still harm you, it would be a lot more violent, and I would end up with nothing. Thomas, my love, you have to believe me." She paused and waited. I looked over at the doctor, and he shrugged. "Candace." I started to say, "It's all right, Thomas," she said. Interrupting me, she gave me a sad smile looking into my eyes for a moment before they shifted away again. "I know that we're divorced. I get that, but when our baby is born, I am sure they will let me out, and I'll make it up to you. All those things I did, honey, they all meant nothing to me. You have to know you're the only one I love." "When Roger took me the first time, I felt so guilty," Candace said, whispering like it was a secret. "But when George found out and then my work, they forced me." "Thomas," she looked up at me again, her eyes pleading. "Can you forgive me?" I paused. "Candace." She started to speak again, interrupting me once again. "It's okay, Thomas. Our baby will help you forgive me. We've got this child, and I'll be out then we can be a family. The love meant nothing, and I promise I won't let them hurt you anymore." She started talking non-stop. "I care about you, Thomas. You're my number one guy. They're all number two, and they don't love you like I do. I mean, they were good, but they were as interested in each other as me. I think they only used me for the money. Thomas, it will be just you and me, and of course, our baby." For the next 15 minutes, she continued talking, sharing delusions about our baby, about us getting back together, about her getting out and us being a family. At one point, she stopped and both the doctor and I exchanged glances, and then we heard a sob. "I know I messed up, Thomas," she said softly, with a touch of sanity and remorse in her voice that wasn't there before. "I know this baby isn't yours and you and I will never." She choked back a sob. "The medications they give me to keep me calm keep me thinking it could be possible, but between them working and when they wear off, I have a few moments where I remember what I did." Tears streamed down her face as she looked at me. I saw pain in her eyes. "I betrayed everyone. I made terrible choices out of greed when you were offering everything to me anyway. I betrayed you repeatedly, and then I was going to harm you. I am a terrible person that deserves consequences." She was becoming agitated. "I know that you dislike me, Thomas, and I am cursed to still feel as much love for you as the day I hurt you." She stood up and removed her prison top in one swift motion, standing there. The doctor cautiously tried to approach her. Candace clutched her belly. "Take your revenge, Thomas," she growled, more at herself than at me. "Hit me and make me cry. Hurt me and make me feel the pain you feel. This baby isn't yours. I gave this body away when it wasn't mine to give." She collapsed to the ground, sobbing. I wasn't sure what to do, so I just sat there. It was supposed to be yours, Thomas. It was supposed. She kept repeating as she sat on the ground. Slowly, Candace looked over at me and then up at the doctor. The doctor, sensing that things were reaching a breaking point, spoke softly to my ex-wife. I think it's time we have some dinner and you have your next round of medication. Don't you, Candace? The doctor helped her put her top back on, and as she knocked on the door and the guard outside came to get her, Candace took one last glance at me, a small sad smile on her face. Live a good life, Thomas. And with that, she was gone. A week later, her doctor called me and thanked me for meeting with her. She told me that the conversation went better than he expected and Candace ended up giving birth to a little girl. The baby was healthy and they were running a DNA test for the father. Candace had asked them to find a loving family to adopt the child so she could have a better future, rather than going through the foster system, which she knew wouldn't provide the stability she needed. That night after meeting with Candace, I felt unsettled until Iona placed my head on her belly and I felt our son kick. 2 months later, John Thomas Other was born. I thought about the innocent little girl, and in a moment of weakness, I had Damien reach out to the adoption agency and inquire about adopting Candace's little girl. Another 2 months passed, and little Macy Candace Other came to live with us. We learned that she was Randy's child, and Damien gladly took him to court for child support. In the end, a small amount of money was set aside for her university funds. Of course, she would never need it, but it was the principle. Iona, for her part, treated Candace's daughter no differently than her own biological children. We both believed that the child should not be affected by the mistakes of her biological parents. Iona and I got married a year later, once our children were old enough to walk. On our honeymoon, we ended up finding out that we were going to have another baby. A year and a half later, a little brother joined the family, and Iona convinced me to get a vasectomy. When Macy turned 18, we decided it was time to tell her the truth about her origins, our history with her biological parents, and reassure her that no matter what, we loved her. There were a mix of emotions in our home that week, and it was a conversation with Auntie Mel that helped Macy settle down and understand that Iona and I would always be her parents, even if we didn't particularly care for her biological parents. Anyway, we arranged a meeting for Macy to meet both Randy and Candace. Randy didn't show much interest and insulted her, calling her a mistake that should have never been born. That resulted in 2 guards separating us and putting Randy in the infirmary for a week, losing 3 teeth in the process. Macy never saw him again. Candace, on the other hand, was a different story. Over the years, she had improved enough to be released into the general prison population. She still faced challenges, but her doctors informed us that a few other prisoners looked out for her and helped keep her out of too much trouble. When Candace saw Macy standing there with Iona and me, she immediately knew and broke down, sinking to her knees in the visitor hall, her hand covering her mouth as she sobbed. Macy, being a compassionate young woman, walked over and helped her up, guiding her to a table. Iona and I stood back and watched as Macy, extending her hand, said to Candace, "Hi, my name is Macy Candace Other, and my mom and dad tell me that you're my birth mother." We watched as Candace broke down crying. The guards were watching as well, but we had informed them beforehand that this meeting would take place, and the prison warden approved some physical contact as long as Candace went through an extensive search later. I must admit, even I was moved by the scene of my adopted daughter and my ex-wife before me. Iona looked at me and wiped away a tear, joking that it must be allergies. A moment later, my wife pulled me over to Candace, and we spent the next hour talking. Candace expressed her gratitude for me adopting Macy. She had no idea what had happened to her after she gave her up and didn't even know her name. The fact that I had taken care of her daughter meant the world to Candace, and her doctors told us that she showed significant improvement in her behavior after our meeting. She still had some time left in her sentence, but the prison staff let us know that she became a much better prisoner after that encounter. As for Macy, she visited Candace on her birthday and during Christmas time. They were never extremely close, but at her mother's and Auntie Mel's insistence, Macy made an effort to see her. I, too, reluctantly gave my approval. I was slowly coming to a place of forgiveness, but Candace knew, just as I did, that we would never be friends. As for Iona and me, she is still the woman who brings immense joy to my life. She took a chance one day to let me know that I was being taken advantage of. She still creates opportunities for us to express our love in various places. She cares for me deeply and will stand up for me against anyone who shows interest, even if it means scolding them in another language. Then she insists that we reconnect intimately, reclaiming our commitment to each other, just like the dedicated wife that she is.